So good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Forestry Commission's Disability, Neurodivergence and Carer Staff Network, I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today on deaf awareness. So we have Vicky Deeks with us, who is representing Wellity Global, and Vicky will be leading the session, and I'll hand over to Vicky shortly. But first of all, just wanted to let you know a couple of things. So there are closed captions or subtitles within the chat should you need them, which you can find in the options of your Teams app or browser. Please also note that we are recording the session for anyone who missed out, and for you to share as well with your colleagues. So why is this such an important topic then, deaf awareness? There are more than 70 million people in the world with a hearing impairment, and this session will dive into effective ways of access and communication and the importance of stepping outside of our comfort zones to benefit those around us. Hopefully it will help us to also reduce stigma and explore social inclusion. We recently marked Deaf Awareness Week with a blog post from our lovely colleague Rachel Giles, who's with us on the call as well. And we had some great engagement with the blog, and this has now resulted in us setting up a subgroup and Teams channel for colleagues who are deaf and hard of hearing in order to support one another. So having some great outcomes from this work already, which is great. And so in this session, we will learn about the challenges faced by individuals with hearing impairments and learn some practical communication strategies and much more. So I'll now hand you over to Vicky, who will lead the session. And can I just also ask you if in the chat, feel free to put any questions that we can take later on. And also just if you'd like to introduce yourselves to each other, just put which organization or department or team you're from, and anything that you'd like to learn from this session. So over to Vicky, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Great to meet you all this afternoon. Hope you're doing all okay. My name is Vicky and I am deaf. I'm down to 18% hearing. So I'm going to make this very relevant for everybody as I'm currently in between worlds, and I hope that you will really understand a lot from what I'm about to go through with you this afternoon. So thank you once again. It sounds like a really encouraging workforce you've got here where they promote this kind of conversation, and I really love the way that that was introduced just then. So if we can move on to the next slide, let's make a start. So if anyone would like to join in, if this kind of causes any issues or you start to get a headache because it's very difficult doing two things at once, please don't worry about captions. But if you would like to understand what it is like to actually use the captions, if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see the More button with the 3 dots. And if you want to access the captions, it's just in that option there. And you can just try and do two things at the same time, which is what people like me have to do all the time. Now, let me explain what captions actually are. You might have heard of them being known to, be described as subtitles or captions. So just to explain the difference between the two, subtitles are literally a language barrier. So if you're watching a film or TV series in a language that isn't your own, the subtitles will change the language so you can understand it. So it's literally just a language switch. Captions, on the other hand, are what I desperately miss out on. It's the word context, and that's what we really miss out on sometimes. And what they actually do that's different to subtitles is they provide extra information that is really helpful to the situation. So it might say in a film, car approaching in brackets. It might say in a TV series, a dog barking in distance. So something extra to what is actually being said. You've got CC, which is called closed captions. And that's usually on your YouTube, where you can choose whether to have captions on or not, like is the case for these meetings. Or you can have open captions, which are there all the time. So if we move on to the next slide, let's just go into a bit more detail. So what we're going to be looking at today is understanding some of the main challenges that are faced by people like myself, and learning practical communication strategies. You don't have to learn sign language. For a start, it will take you at least 6 years to really know it fluently. If you know some of the basic signs, that's great, but I don't use sign language. So we're going to look at an alternative where people like me will be able to fit in to whatever situation. All different kinds of preconceptions, lots of stigmas out there. That is a very, regular thing, and I'll go into a little bit more detail there, and how you can help in the workplace is just to support other people that are in the same situation. So next slide. You're going to get fed up of me saying that, sorry. If you see here the image on screen. Now, what I am, the word stigma, what the main issue is with, my opinion, is the fact that you're never going to feel old enough to have a hearing loss. There's always going to be something that thinks, oh, I'm not old, I'm only in my 20s, I'm only in my 50s, I'm only in my 80s, it doesn't matter. This diagram just illustrates at the top here that anyone can have any form of hearing loss, whether they are from a baby right up to, a very advanced age. But what doesn't help here is the marketing. And if you were to pick up a leaflet or look on images and just type in deaf or hearing loss, you're likely to find someone of a very much advanced generation, and be very careful with that. Much, in kind of really high upper end of age, if you like, and that is, I think, one of the main reasons why we choose to deny this kind of disability. When I'm talking about identities, you will probably be aware of the whole, different ways that instead of saying gay and lesbian, for example, we like to be known as different type of, different ways to describe ourselves. We don't just say gender anymore. We say it's all about identities and how we want to be referred to as. And that is the same with being deaf or having a hearing loss. There's lots of different ways to identify yourself as. And when it says something like Deaf Awareness Week, if you don't identify as being deaf, that's quite a scary word, then you're going to kind of be lost there. You're going to move straight past that marketing or promotion, whatever it is, feeling like you don't identify with that in some way. So like with the whole, the whole pride and everything like this, with the rainbows and everyone joining in no matter what and everyone feeling catered for, what I would love to see in workplaces especially is different kind of ways of identifying this. So instead of just saying deaf awareness or hearing impaired, maybe advertising in some way with all of them. So it could be hearing impaired, hearing loss, hard of hearing. We've got a bit deafened, deafened, late deafness. There's lots of different ways. It's all about the terminology and making everyone feel included in there. So that's what I'm working on in different projects as well. So hearing loss it's an invisible disability. I mean, I've got my hair down now, so you can't see my hearing aids, but you would pick up if you were to have a conversation with me, face to face, that I'm missing quite a lot. So it's not something that is obvious until you actually try to communicate with me, but it's something that we are definitely not invisible, and I just want to kind of promote that as much as I can. So next slide, let's move on. So types of hearing loss. You've got 3 different types of hearing loss, and depending on what your situation is, most people that have hearing loss, when they could hear before, is on the left-hand side, which is known as sensorineural hearing loss. And that is from a lot of people in the military. They go into a war situation and there's lots of explosions, loud noises, people working in nightclubs, construction, noisy kind of environments have sensorineural hearing loss. So it's something that was fine before and now is no longer working. It's likely to be on that side. And also with the natural aging process. On the right-hand side, we've got what is called conductive hearing loss, which is, for whatever reason, sound cannot make its way through to the brain effectively. It might be that there's too much earwax in your ears, for example. There's something that is blocking that sound from getting through. Maybe some kind of infection or, something like that. And then if you have a mixture of the two, It's known as mixed hearing loss. Now, my type of hearing loss is caused from an incident when I was 18 years old relating to what we commonly refer to now as domestic violence, where someone showed their anger in a very kind of surprising way, and I ended up with head trauma, blunt head trauma, which, if you notice from here, is in the middle section. So I have what is known as mixed hearing loss, and along with that, with any kind of loss, whether it's a loss of a person or a loss of a feeling or whatever it is, comes the grieving journey. So you might have lost part of your hearing, but it's a whole different journey that you're now on, because you're focusing in the same way as someone that had lost a person. You are coping with grief. So if we move on to the next slide, this is all about our lives here. So the types of hearing loss. So if you're, we're going to look at this in a second when in a couple of slides forward, when we look at your what you would regard as your hearing ability right now at this moment. Don't worry, everything's anonymous, so it's absolutely fine. But the types of hearing loss you can have, you could be absolutely fine, just have normal hearing. I would never say perfect, but normal. You know, you can hear quite well. You could have mild hearing loss, where you might struggle to hear someone in the next room, for example. You could have moderate hearing loss, which is typically where you struggle in conversation, just different voices, voice levels, voice tones, pitches, that type of thing. You could have severe hearing loss, which is where you really struggle in most of the time in different situations. And then you can have profound hearing loss. So you've got normal, mild, moderate, severe, and profound. So we'll have a look at that in a bit more detail, but just moving down here, we've got adapting to change. Your life is not really going to be the same anymore, because hearing loss affects every single thing in your life, and it will do from this point on. And what you're actually dealing with is you're going to feel like you are in the middle of two different worlds, where you don't really fit into the hearing world, but you also can still hear some things quite well. So you might not consider yourself to be in the deaf world, just you're kind of floating around in the middle. I know that might sound strange, but it's kind of, you know, what am I? Who am I? It's all about just a feeling of confusion quite a lot. It also, what a lot of people don't realise is it does affect your balance and your spatial awareness. So, for example, I might know that something is happening because my hearing aids might vibrate, but I can't always tell what sound it is or where it's coming from. Because hearing aids work effectively for around 15 feet in all directions. So I might hear something that is happening upstairs in my house, but feel like it's happening right in front of me. There's no way of knowing. So I'm sure that gives you a bit of an idea of how confusing it can actually be. We've got distance and isolation. So though the next one actually comes hand in hand here, the difference between loss of sight and loss of sound is connection to people. So if you lose your sight, you're not able to see things anymore. You know, things right in front of you are no longer, you're not able to see. Whereas if you lose your ability to hear at any capacity, you lose a connection to people. So there's a real isolating stage here. And when I talk about loneliness to a lot of people, a lot of it comes across with like it's implying I'm alone. I'm far from alone. I've got lots of family, friends, work colleagues. I'm always with someone. But if you cannot connect to them, as in join into a conversation and follow the way that conversation is moving on so you can join in, you're feeling left out. And that feeling of being left out, even if you're in a room full of people you know, is you feel very lonely. You feel very like you're broken, like you're not working very well, like some kind of a robot. But what we do need to help us, and even if you don't have a hearing loss, you might understand this if you're trying to tell someone that you've got some kind of issues and you need support. What a lot of people tend to do is the typical human being form, you know, we want to hug each other and make each other feel comforted. But the last thing that we need is sympathy, because what that actually does is it confirms how bad something is. So if I was to say to someone, I also have tinnitus as well. If I was to say to someone, oh, my tinnitus is really crazy today, the first thing that a lot of people feel like they need to say is, that sounds awful. I can't imagine how you deal with that. If that was me, I don't think I'd cope very well. And it's those kind of statements that are not, no one's being mean or anything, it's just not helpful. So in a workplace, in a family situation, or if a friend comes to you and says they're not happy about something, they're struggling with whatever it is, maybe change it to a question rather than a statement that blocks off that conversation. Maybe something like, what is that like? How can I help? Can you explain that to me? Because I don't understand what that's like. Maybe I can help if we, work out the problem together. And then you've got a conversation rather than someone walking off, probably feeling like they're going to burst into tears because you've just made them, you can't just giving them a hug doesn't really solve any problems, even though it's nice to actually help someone, change it to a question. That's always a good idea. So let's move on to the next part. I hope you're all okay with this so far. What is inclusion? Now, this comes under a whole lot of umbrellas, really. When you are talking about hearing loss, it's lots of things. It's accessibility, it's lack of inclusion, it's exclusion, if you like, because that's how we are made to feel. But let's have a look at some actual definitions of inclusion. A sense of belonging, the practice of including people. So think about your workplace right now and what you will have amongst you all that are part of this today, and also the rest of your workforce, is that they may be dealing with a form of hearing loss or any kind of disability, mental health issues, but they're not likely to tell you. So in a workplace especially, it's really important to just know that that is a situation, understanding people's reasons for maybe not disclosing this information, and you're just having that in the back of your mind and changing things, adapting things, accommodating, knowing that those are the actual reasons for it. So everyone wants to do well. We all want to leave at the end of the day feeling like we've achieved something. And what we have at work is a lot of staff rooms and social type of situations. And for people like me, I'm quite a fun, sociable person, but there's often a situation where I'll walk into a staff room, for example, and people are in the middle of a conversation and everyone's laughing and joining in, and you kind of stood there thinking, I don't know how to join in here. You can't just say, can everyone just stop talking and tell me from the beginning exactly what you're saying? Because it's just not real life, is it? So I often find myself like, if you've ever seen the film Bridget Jones or American Pie, where you walk in and you can start just laughing with people, you might get a few funny looks, or you can just sit there in the corner and just look like the quiet one. There's all these kind of situations that leave you feeling a little bit anxious. How do I deal with this situation? What do I do here? So yes, all different issues. I mean, obviously I'm talking about disability today, but there's lots of other conversations that could be had from this. So if we move on to the next slide, have a look. So lots of different colours here. This is a feast for your eyes, very rainbow effect. So when we have what I call a lack of inclusion, what I'm actually talking about is, if we'll go around clockwise, we'll start at the top, the yellow one. So good communication skills. Whenever a job is advertised, I'm sure you'll all back me up here when I say it's usually one of the main skills that is required of any job that you go for, any job, no matter what it is. It usually says excellent or good communication skills. Now, for me, you'll probably see that I can, you're probably hearing that I can speak absolutely fine. It took me a while to get to this level, because when you wear hearing aids, it changes your voice and everyone else's voices to sound very robotic and echoey. So this has took a lot of practice to get to this stage, but hopefully I'm speaking at a level that is, that you can hear okay. But good communication skills is definitely something that I wouldn't class myself as having, because although I can speak, it's the other part of that that isn't working so well. So it can often put people off. Maybe to get past that, you could discuss what is actually needed to be communicated. Is it because you need to use a phone, for example? Is it because you need to run a meeting? Could you maybe be more specific about what that involves? The recruitment process and marketing. It's focused more on interviews. Could we make any adaptations in an interview? Do you need anything to help, etc.? This type of thing. And the interview is absolutely nailed to a T pretty much by many organisations. But what we need more of is help in the workplace to prevent any incidents happening where people feel excluded. A lot of disability awareness in general is people think that you are not as sincere as maybe, maybe joking a little bit, maybe your disability isn't as bad. We get a lot of, well, you heard me a moment ago, why can't you hear me now? And it's that lack of awareness where people don't understand how hearing aids work. Maybe in one particular room I can hear someone quite well, and then move to the corridor, for example, and I'm struggling, and it does look like I'm not being honest. That is what it looks like, but it's not the case at all. Non-disclosure, people don't want you to know. And unless it's something like a visible disability, like you can see the wheelchair or a typical aid that they are using, people might choose not to tell that just for fear of being left out in some way. 16 million people in the UK have a disability, and 5 million of those are in employment. So there's a lot of us that are not working because of the disability. Maybe if more accessibility was introduced into workplaces, that might not be the case. And then the last one at the top here, when we said at the beginning, I know 70 million people was the discussed amount of people in the world, but it's actually 1.5 billion. And what I'm talking about here in terms of hearing loss is anything greater than 25 decibels loss of sound. And we're talking about 1 in 5 people. Now remember, if you start with a mild form of hearing loss, you're not likely to disclose that information for at least 10 years, all right, unless it starts to get quite bad. And that is what we are dealing with. It's that holding back information. Oh, it's probably fine, it's no problem. But you've got 20% of your organisation that could really do with captions in all videos, that could really do with seeing your face in meetings more. There might be lip reading for all you know, and all these different techniques that we're going to look at in a little bit more detail. So if we can move on to the next slide. Some very familiar comments. Hearing loss, if I was to sum it up in a nutshell, or one of the most frustrating things is repetition. And you get told the same thing quite a lot. And if you imagine a typical day, how many interactions you have with people that you know and people that you don't know. So it might be in a typical day when you're working, you know your colleagues, you know them quite well, but if you might find that they do the same typical, not looking at you when they're talking to you, maybe covering the face up or whatever, and having to repeat, could you just say that again? If you are at the stage where you talk about your hearing loss, maybe you just constantly feel like you are repeating, remember, I can't hear, can you just say that again? Can you just say it just one more time? Then you feel like giving up. But what people often say to me is, you're quiet, hence the staff room situation that I mentioned at the beginning. That is what I look like. But if you were to ask someone, especially my husband or kids, is Vicky quiet? Absolutely no. No, not at all. You're not listening to me. That is, again, what it looks like. That is how it comes across. It looks like I'm not listening because I've not answered your question, or I've not joined in. So it looks like I'm maybe in a daydream. I'm not focusing. Are your hearing aids in? Are they switched on? Hearing aids, just to clarify, it's just as if the same type of the way that maybe someone is speaking in the corner of the room, and then all of a sudden they're now speaking with a microphone. So although their voice is elevated, the sound is elevated. If it wasn't clear when they were speaking at this level, it's not going to be clear when they're speaking at this level. It's a clarity. It's not how loud someone is speaking, it's how clear they are speaking. And that's a really important point to get across here. A lot of people feel like they need to shout and really raise their voice. And the issue with shouting is that you get yourself an audience, because you add sound to a situation, like the little kid that throws a wobbly in the middle of Tesco. Everyone everyone stops and looks around, and sheer panic on the parents, and that is what happens when I say to people, can you just say that again? They feel like they need to say it, but really loud. And then I feel other people looking round, and it causes, I just want the ground to open up and swallow me up here because it's embarrassing. So yeah, the same, and it's a repetition. And so we're talking about a lot of mental health issues here because you feel like you are a burden to people. And when you're having to answer the same questions, I'm not just talking about once a day, I'm not just talking about once in a blue moon. This is all the time. And the worst people, even though they don't mean it in any way, is the people that know you quite well, because they just get into a situation. I think this is a two-way thing where we just get used to something, and it's just easier to not say something sometimes, and it's stress on both sides. So we'll just leave it. Don't worry. It's that type of thing. You've repeated what I just said in a meeting. If someone has asked a question that you've already dealt with, but then someone hasn't heard that bit, there's that awkwardness of, we've just said this about half an hour ago, Vicky. And then you feel like it's the feelings of, I'm not quite good enough here. And it's those type of things that are really difficult, especially in a workplace. So let's move on to the next slide. Just to show you what that looks like, I've got a visual here. You see a piece of paper. This is a really, really effective and such a simple way of demonstrating how it damages your mental health. And if you see the image at the top, it causes a barrier between myself or anyone with hearing loss and other people because of the lack of awareness. And if I show you with a simple piece of paper here, you can screw it up. Just one of those comments, bearing in mind they are said quite a lot, just one comment, and your mental health is affected. And what I often get is, I'll just open the page back up again. What I often get when people realise that, she's got a hearing problem, she didn't hear you, they say, I'm sorry, Vicky, I didn't realise, let me try again. But the damage has already been done. Words are very, very damaging. And it's not that anyone's sensitive, or maybe we are, but it's not the issue here. The issue is that we are used to this all the time. It's another knock, it's another one. So even though you get an apology and we know no one's been mean, the damage is never going to be the same. If I just hold this up here, you can try straightening it out as much as you can, but it will never be the same. It's all right, the damage is done, So a very good technique to use with a simple sheet of paper, just to show people what they're actually doing when the words have left the mouth, but you can't take it back with an apology. It's beyond that. So maybe think about the words not leaving, not leaving the mouth in the first place. I know it's easier said than done, but it's just maybe changing things as a question rather than a statement. So let's move on to the next slide. We're going through here. Lots of visuals to now, I don't know if anyone recognises a song in the middle, but I've just changed the lyrics just for a bit of fun here. But the disability is not a problem, not to us, because it may be just a problem to start with, or while we're getting used to it. But when we get into a situation where we're very familiar and we're okay with this, I don't know whether okay is the right kind of term, but we've got to a level where we understand it. It's all about the accessibility. And having to ask for help and support is a massive issue for many people, including myself. I'm very independent. I'm very stubborn. I'm not even sorry. I don't mind admitting that. I'm extremely stubborn. I don't like having to ask people for help. What it should be is there for anybody. No one should have to ask, can I have captions enabled on Zoom in particular? Something like that is, you've got to actually get permission for the captions from the host. It should just be available to anybody. So just looking at a few of these, let's just pick on some random ones. I take my kids to the cinema. We're always there. We go to theatres. It was only on Tuesday night I went to see Girls Aloud with my friend. That was my birthday treat. And when they're singing, I know the songs are very familiar, but when they're speaking, I've no idea what they were saying. They were talking about how they lost a bandmate, but you're actually putting the burden on whoever is with you in the group to tell you what has been said, what you've missed out on. So if they could provide captions or some way that they could be quite discreet, so people like me could have the choice, but instead we're very good at lip reading and we can pick up, you know, that idea. Let's have a look. Two people situations. Yeah, what I'm talking about there is I'm not a hater of people at all, but when people raise their voices, when there's more people in the room, it causes more situations where everyone looks round and everyone trying to jump in and help me out, and it's just like I just want to escape, you know, that type of thing. Forward facing, really big one here. Forward facing everyday activities. Think about things you do with your friends or family that isn't where you're all facing the same way. Now, I'm talking about very basic things here, like being in a car. So when I'm driving or I'm the passenger, everyone's facing the same way. But someone like me needs to see, I need to see faces and I need to see hands and gestures and clues. So driving, my kids will talk to each other, everyone else will talk, but ultimately I'm watching the road. I can't, because I can't hear, I can't, you know, turn around in the middle of, you know, down the motorway or whatever. Cinema, theatre, in a classroom, in a meeting, all these situations where you're all facing the same way. Maybe if it's possible in a meeting, think about the layout, and so we're not all facing the same way. Maybe you could be sat in groups of 4, so there's an element of, you know, we're not all facing just the front. And it will be really helpful to a lot of people. And the last one I'll focus on is technology. Captions are not always included, and Netflix at the moment, there's a couple of programs that have been brought out, but captions aren't available. And I never thought I'd slag off Netflix in a million years because I'm a huge fan, but Fat Friends came back to Netflix and the captions weren't available. And what my problem is, and I'm sure you'll agree here, is I don't get any discount for being deaf. I have to pay the same as someone that can hear. But they've taken them off and it's a real problem. And also, if you were to pay for something on Prime, if anyone has Amazon Prime, you don't know if the captions are available until the purchase has gone through. So maybe there's a film on there, I think, oh, I just fancy watching that, I've not seen that, from the 80s or whatever, and it comes on, but there's no way of knowing until it starts playing and that payment has gone through whether captions are there. So it might have been a waste of money for all I know. So very frustrating. I don't know if anyone picked up on the song there, but that is Material Girl, and I just changed it to Hearing World rather than Material World. So yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Right, okay. So what I've got here is I've made this quite, hopefully this is straightforward to use. This is all anonymous, so it's Menti. I'm sure you've seen this before, and it's just a very straightforward way. If you want to just scan the image that you can see on screen here, there's no way of coming back here. I understand the idea behind it because of my own situation. So there is just an amount of people that will do this. I'm just going to bring it up on my screen so I can see how many. If you just want to have a look at what you would class your hearing to be, your stage of hearing right now, what you would class it to be as, let's just have a look. So we've got normal hearing, we've got mild, we've got moderate, severe, profound. Which one would you actually, which one would you put yourself into at the moment, do you think? Just give you a minute to do that. Okay, thank you for voting. I've got a few up here so far. Now, let's give you a minute to finish that, and then what I'll do is I'll tell you these results at the end when we've gone through. Oh, that's going crazy. You're all voting there. Got 25 of you, so almost everyone. This looked very interesting. And as soon as I say, wait till we get to the end, and I will go through these results with you. They're just coming up on my phone here. You just scan the image on the screen, and it's just to look at choosing which level of hearing you would class yourself as having right now. If you've got normal hearing, if you've got mild hearing loss, if you would consider yourself to have a moderate hearing loss, severe, or profound. Okay, right. So thank you all for voting, and I know some of you are still doing that, but if you want to scan the screen, we'll just move on, just to make sure I get everything done in the time allowed to you. So how can you support those with hearing loss? So based on everything that we've looked at so far, let's have a look at the next slide here to go through some very creative now. Right, now, if you see here, this is all about North America. You may be familiar with sign language. Some of you may already know how to sign. It's a really cool skill to master if anyone uses that. But before there was sign language, there was a tribe known as the Plain Indians. And they actually have their own sign language. It was changed after quite a few years, but we're going back to the 1500s now. And the Plains Indians, what they would do is, this was where it started from, the technique known as hand talk. And this is something that if you were in a certain tribe, it would allow everybody in that tribe to communicate with, effectively. Whether you could hear or not, it was irrelevant, because what they would do is use their hands. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know any Plains Indian sign language, but it's a very relevant technique for when sound isn't effective. So, for example, hand talk is something that is still used in the military now. You might see in some films that obviously they don't want to make anyone, the enemy, know that they are there. So they do things with their hands to point, and they do all this kind of thing. And the person that they are communicating with knows exactly what they are saying. And this is where it came from, the Plains Indians. And also for things like hunting. So if sound isn't effective, they brought in their own language, which was using their hands. It was using facial expressions and things like this, but mainly their hands to communicate. And what has happened is, as it's evolved over the years, Plains Indian Sign Language is actually an official sign language now. It's PISL. We have ASL, American Sign Language. We've got British Sign Language. There's over 300 in the whole world. But it started off with something called hand talk. And if we move on to the next slide here, we'll see this in a bit more detail. Just give it a second to come up. Right, okay. Now, this is what we might be more familiar with now. These are our type of hand talk. Now, just looking at all of those, we probably use these on a typical basis, the one at the top in the middle, oh, I'm about to start crying. But we know we don't have to say anything. And as soon as something happens, or something happens on TV, we all look round and do this. Where did that come from? The Plains Indians. It was brought on through the years, and we have our own version now. We all use hand talk. If someone wants to ask us for directions, like the scarecrow at the bottom from The Wizard of Oz, if someone pulls over and says to you, "Can you tell me where this street is?" I can imagine none of you here right now could give directions without using your hands. It's just something that we do. So what we do is something like say, "Go to the end of the street here. When you get to the roundabout, go all the way around." we use our hands to give directions. I do this at the college that I work at too. I'm a lecturer. I teach GCSE English, and we have students that are lost. And probably the worst person to ask is me. But when I do know where I'm going, I use the same thing. That door at the very end of the corridor, just turn left, go straight to the end, and it's all about hand talk. So different gestures. And when I say hand talk, it's different to sign language, because it is something that if you go to pretty much any country in the whole world and you use one of these signs, for example, peace is always going to be the same wherever you go. Thumbs up, everyone knows it's a universal kind of language for everyone. And when you're at a concert, rock on, talk to the hand, and any of these are very, very similar, and we get an idea of what we are talking about. Whether there's a language barrier is irrelevant, but your hands are really, really effective. So in the workplace, you could maybe, I don't mean go over the top using your hands, but you probably find that you do talk by using your hands anyway. If you notice people in meetings, they might be talking about sales revenue, or how someone's doing really well, and we say like, "Brilliant, well done." And you're going to pick this up all the time now, and you're going to remember me when I've said this, but we do use our hands. If we move on to the next slide, let's go through this in more detail. There are 3 main types of clues that someone like me, and amongst your workplace, amongst your friends, family, whatever, in a very busy, noisy environment, maybe you're trying to have a conversation, you're going out, you go out downtown, you have a few drinks, and you're going to somewhere that is really, really noisy, you'll find that you are actually lip reading without realizing it. But if you can do this more in a workplace to help anybody, if you see the lady at the top here, we are focusing on lips. 30% of communication is, from my point of view, that I'm studying, I really study faces when I'm talking, is picked up on what you're saying. We understand movements, we understand different shapes of the mouth and the way you're speaking. Whether you're speaking from the side or from the front, it's all about the mouth. If you look at the guy in the middle, it's all about the eyes. Now, if I've understood something or I thought I've understood something, your eyes tell me if I've picked it up well or not. Very powerful, and you can't lie. Your eyes are something that, it's a massive technique. And you'll find that when it was in the COVID nightmare that we all had, you might have found that you actually looked at eyes when you were speaking. When the mouth was covered up, you probably were struggling as much as what I do sometimes, but using the eyes really does help. And amongst the lips, the eyes and the hands, we can gather the gist of what you are saying. If you could make sure that you're facing us as much as possible, make sure that you are, oh, I like your hair, anything that you can use your hands for. And think about meetings when you are stood at the front and you are presenting something on screen. I'm guilty of this because I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher for over 20 years. And what we tend to do is when we are talking about something, we look at what we are talking about. We don't look at the people that we are speaking to. So if you have a model of something on the board, or if you are showing someone how to change a wheel or whatever it is, instead of looking at what you are talking about, if you point to what you are talking about, but then keep looking while you're speaking, try and keep this available to the people that are, in the meeting or whatever it is. So if you're talking about your sales figures, instead of looking around and then getting the back of your head and doing all this pointing, maybe just point to the board and then this for speaking. And that will be effective for everybody. Okay, let's move on. We're almost at the end here. Let's just go through the next few bits here. So ways to support. Assume anyone you communicate with has some scale of hearing loss. They're not going to tell you if they're, for whatever reason, stigmas. They may be ashamed of it. They may be just in the denial process that they may not feel old enough. That's always a big one, a very possible one there. It might be that there's a fear of job loss if their job does rely on a significant amount of hearing. For example, using a phone on a regular basis, they might not want to declare this in case people start thinking, oh, you might feel like you're being watched. And it's just about having that awareness that that is not the case. People do want to support you, but we are not so good at coming forward with this disability. So I'm here to tell you it's absolutely fine. And if you speak about this, you'll find a lot of people are in the same situation. And you might find that someone actually says, well, actually, I do struggle too. When my kids are on the back seat of the car, I struggle to hear what they're saying. And you might actually find a bit of a common conversation as you're going through. If repetition is unsuccessful, write it down. Please don't, maybe not say things like it doesn't matter, I'll tell you later, because all we hear is you don't matter enough for me to go to this effort. That is what it doesn't matter if the words are said, that is what we kind of understand from that. Let's have a look use visible speech. So again, remembering the three main points of communication for everybody. So the lips, the eyes, and the hands. If you can make these three available to people as much as you can without it being weird, you don't want to stare at people, but if you can do this as much as possible, communication will be a lot more successful. And if we move on to the last part here, some more useful tips. Use visual, anything visual. If you are just speaking, then people are likely to forget what you said. If you are speaking plus a visual, people will remember it. It sticks in here because pictures, images, moving GIFs and memes and videos and things stick in the mind along with words. If you use visual plus sound plus getting people involved, then others will understand. So the three main areas of including anybody are sound plus sight plus actually getting involved with things. That will really be the best way to include everybody. Remind others to speak clearly. You know, if you have, not really nice saying someone mumbles, but if you can, you know, if you know someone that is maybe not speaking as clear as what someone will be able to hear, you know, struggling to hear, maybe you could, you know, just repeat it for them, maybe in a discreet way. Stating someone that is quiet is actually quite damaging, because it might be a reason, such as myself, where I can't join in. You know, it might be some other kind of disability. It's not that anybody is quiet on purpose, and you'll know this from people, you know, they surprise you in different ways. And the one that is known as the quiet one, notice hand tuck there, we all know what that means. Someone that is stated to be quiet is probably the least quiet person known to man, such as myself. Can't stress that enough. When I come home and I say, oh, they think I'm quiet, someone just said that, they do laugh. I'm not sure why, that's quite rude, but yeah. Talk about disabilities of any kind, so it becomes the norm. We're all know I'm just exactly the same as you. I do things the same as you. I want the same things. I've got a family, I've got a career, I do the exact same things as everybody else. The only thing I can't do is hear. So, and when I see your face, I can see who's losing their cool, who's helpful, who isn't, and we pick up on a lot of facial expressions. So let's just move on to the next slide. Don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to reinvent anything. You don't need to learn anything. You don't need to suddenly go out and learn sign language. I don't use sign language, so someone like me wouldn't be effective at all. If that is something that would be useful, if you do have people that do sign, then obviously do that, but you don't need to learn anything new in order to include people like me. It's just about remembering the three main types of communication. The three most effective ways to communicate are with your mouth, your eyes, and your hands. That's it. Even if you forget everything else, if you can just make sure that your faces just give us as much chance as possible, and not just the ones that you know about have got hearing loss. Try to do it with everyone, assuming that they may have you know, a hearing loss they don't talk about. Quiet spaces. Not everyone wants to be in a staff room or a social area with lots of people. May not be to do with hearing loss, but maybe when someone has just finished an activity, they might just want some quiet time without being known as the quiet one or the unsociable one. Maybe it could be a thing that could be introduced at work, where it's like a library as a quiet area, and you go in that room just to chill and just to gather your thoughts and just to look on your phone, or just to be in the zone for a few minutes, and then maybe go into the social area. But it's all about focusing on, you know, we've all got to be mingling together and get on well. And for some people, it's not as easy as that may sound. A role switch challenge. Maybe think about switching with this person. Can you, maybe if you switch it, make it a fun activity. I don't know if that is a possible thing, but maybe an afternoon where you switch roles with someone else, just to see anything that you could maybe change in that role to make it easier for that person. And mirror. If you're wanting someone to speak clearly to you and look at you when they're speaking and do all these wonderful things for communication, maybe if you use that yourself, you'll find that people will do the same for you. And if we move on to the next part, that's it. I'll leave this on screen for the next few minutes, and this is a separate questionnaire here. And if anyone wants to ask any questions, I will go through them, and I'll just give you the results of the hearing. Let's just have a look what we've got. So out of 28 people that voted here, it's shown that 15 people would class themselves as having normal hearing. 8 people have considered themselves as having a mild hearing loss. 4 people have considered themselves to have a moderate hearing loss, and 1 person has disclosed profound hearing loss. So 1, 2, 5, 8, let's have a look. 13 people out of, let's just do a quick calculation here. 13 out of 28. Let me just very, very quickly do a calculation. 46% of participants today have some form of hearing loss, so that's just under 50%. And so it's maybe worth some discussions to follow on from this, but very interesting there. If anyone would like to ask me any questions, I'll just open up the chat here. And I may have missed some along the way. I'm sorry if I've not been looking at this. I was just trying to focus on what I was doing there. So let's have a look. Yeah, so if anyone wants to ask any questions, feel free to type in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask me something, I'll try to answer anything as best I can.
Thank you very much, Vicky. That was really interesting. So I do see one hand raised there, so I think I need to unmute person to be able to allow them.
Okay.
Are you unmuted, Rachel? Are you able to ask a question?
Oh, hello. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I'm the very deaf one in the audience, so thank you for that. That was so you were just describing my life, really, and describing all of the challenges that I face every day, being alone when you're in a room of people, walking into a room and laughing to try to pretend that you've heard what they've said, embarrassment, having to say pardon 15 times after everything. So it's always nice to hear when someone else is suffering in the same way, in a way, because it makes me feel less kind of isolated. But what I would say, Wally, really to you, is that it's really disappointing how few, well, I don't know if there are any managers on here, and how we can make people hear this message more, because they're not here listening, so they're not learning how to help those of us who are struggling with our hearing. And to have 13 in the audience who are hard of hearing, I suspect those people have joined because they're hard of hearing, not entirely because they want to help others, although I did see some messages in the chat from people who do want to help, so thank you to those people. But is there a way we can make people listen to this, and or a summary of this, because things need to change to make things more inclusive? That's it. Thank you very much, Vicky. That was really good.
Thank you, Rachel. No, that's a really good question. What we'll do is, it is disappointing with anything like this, when we don't, get everyone who needs to hear the message in the room. So what we will do is share the recording with all our colleagues. So we'll put it on Roots, our intranet, and we'll also try and get it out to as many managers as possible and ask them to watch back the recording. But thank you for that. And just to let you know, also, we've set up, thanks to you, Rachel, for coming up with the idea and taking it forward. We've set up a Teams channel for deaf and hard of hearing colleagues. So that's in the disability, neurodivergence and carers staff network Teams channel. But I think you should be able to join directly from the link as well. So if you're already in the disability and neurodiversity channel, you can join through there, but otherwise you can join through the link. If you have any problems, just email me and I can add you directly. I do see a couple more hands, so I'll go to Helen.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. So I'm the Active Forest Coordinator at Alice Holt Forest. I am working with a running provider who's been on site for about 10 years. And their event provider does sign language at their park run, and we're working together to see how we can make the next event much more inclusive for those with impairments, so disabilities, deaf, blind, blind runners. And I just wanted some guidance really on what we can do before the event, and then at the event, during, when we brief the people at the event, and then during the event as well. If you can give us, not now, but if you can give us any guidance of what we can do, that would be great.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I get asked this question quite a lot, and because I go to a lot of networking events and try to, even though it's a very daunting thing, especially when you're deaf and have tinnitus in big rooms and things, it's quite crazy. But I did get asked this in a networking event. I said, what could we do to make it more accessible? And one really good suggestion is if you can send someone, anybody, it doesn't matter, not just the ones that come forward, but if you can send all participants something like an agenda of events that are going to be happening that day, so they know what's going to, this is important for meetings and training as well. If we have some kind of idea of what is coming up and in what order, it's not that we're not organised, it's that to avoid that repetition of asking something that's already been brought up. And also at the end, if you could maybe send something out that summarises what has actually happened in that meeting as well, or training, whatever it is. There's also the terminology that is, how you actually getting different people of different disabilities in. And one of the main things that I would say, if you're wanting to know how to make something inclusive for a particular type of disability, if like maybe it's for people that are deaf or for people that are blind, if you actually ask the people to, with the disability, you'll probably find a very different response to Googling it or whatever, because they'll tell you something that is really, really useful. And they might say, no, oh, actually, I missed this bit. They were all stood at the front. It might be the layout of the room or the layout of the actual event that might be worth considering. Maybe instead of lots of people being up at the front, like in a panel or something, maybe it could be people at the side. Maybe it could be people in the middle. Maybe it could be a mixture, So when rather than just all focusing on the front, captions would be an amazing thing. And there is actually an app on your phone. Some of them you have to pay for, which, as you probably know, are the better ones, because always the ones that you have to pay for. But you can download apps that do live captions as well. So, but anything at all where you can give information at the beginning, just come over and maybe sit with if you know someone is deaf or hard of hearing, maybe sit with them, or maybe go around table to table and say, has anyone got any questions? Did you just pick up what was said then? And at the end, give them some kind of summary as what has happened. Very briefly.
Yeah, well, this will be out in the forest though, so we won't have access to a screen.
Oh, okay, that's just yeah, in the forest. So yeah, definitely the an order of events. Something. What we're going to do now. What is happening, and then whenever anyone is actually speaking, just make sure that you are facing as many people as possible, just so they can see.
The lip read. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Visual.
I think we're running out of time, but I think we're able to take one more question. Is that okay, Vicky? So we can go to Sarah, and I'm afraid that will be the last question.
Hi, thanks, Vicky. Really, really useful. So I am a manager within Forest Services, but I retire tomorrow. And I was one of the people that said I didn't have normal hearing. It's a sort of a family genetic thing. So my hearing is only going to go one way as the years progress. So I found it very, very useful. But I think I've been in the Commission 19 years. I've done lots of meetings, and I think if you can get this meeting out to managers, I don't know what you would do, Wally, to get it out to managers or the inclusion ambassadors or something like that, because I think this would be phenomenally useful. I'm going to message my boss on my penultimate day and say, get on this course. But yeah.
Can I just say one last thing? Sorry, thank you for that, Sarah, and good luck with the retirement. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I just want one last thing. I know it's coming to a wrap soon, but if anyone, I know obviously 13 of you that have joined in with this today, if any of you are actually wanting support, a very good technique, a very good tip is there's lots of online groups that you can join, and you don't have to be a joiner in, as in you don't have to comment, you don't have to put posts on, but you'll find, especially on Facebook and things like that, there are groups that you will look at the posts and think, that's me, that's what I'm dealing with, and then read the comments that have been put underneath. You might find that they actually have meetups in person, but I would definitely suggest finding other people in the same situation, because it's an absolute game changer in lots of ways.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Vicky. That was really insightful, educational, and engaging. And everyone on the call, I'm sure, benefited. And like we said, we will get it out to as many people as possible. But I'd just like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you to yourself and to Grace and everyone at Wellity for setting this up. So there's just a message from Grace on there. If anyone did have any other questions that they weren't able to ask, please do feel free to email hello@wellityglobal.com, and I'm sure they'll get back to you. And yeah, so again, thank you so much, and please look out for further webinars, and yeah, keep the conversation going and share the recording once it's out with your colleagues. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah.